you can be yourself. And I think actually early, I wasn't always myself, because sometimes you do hear that, like, here's the rules for the first semester of school. You got to be super hard or whatever you got to be, right? But there's different, I think that's maybe the other misperception of teachers is like, there's a right way to make sure that teaching happens like during the school year. So you'll read some books and they're well-meaning, but like I was miserable when I felt like I had to be like this really strict teacher for the first semester so they wouldn't walk all over me. It wasn't working for me. But I think there's a spot for that too. And when I say strict teacher, I don't even mean like that as a derogatory thing. I just think like I think kids need all sorts of teachers, right? So I love when they go through their 7 periods and I know they've got somebody who's a little bit loose and somebody who just like runs a tight ship. And some of those kids will speak up, and even in my class, and they'll be like, can you just like maybe organize this a little bit more like it was last year? Or like, can you check my homework every day? Because like, I needed that. And so you find like there's so many students, and of course, those things I can adjust to that student. Things I think like trying to be this perfect idea of a teacher and not into it can be kind of stunting.
Oh, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. The purpose of our discussion is for students who are enrolled in CSU Stanislaus Credential Program. As they're finishing up the program, they could really benefit from hearing about some of your experiences in teaching and some of your philosophical beliefs on education. And so I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions, and then hopefully as students watch this, they can glean some interesting ideas from a veteran teacher. So could you introduce yourself and then tell us about what you're teaching now and what you have taught in the past?
Sure. Yeah, my name's Jeff Hakanson, and I'm a secondary ed teacher. So I've been teaching high school math for my whole career. This is my 16th year of teaching. So I'm currently at Turlock High teaching AP Calculus AB to seniors mostly and a few juniors, and then the Honors Math 3 to juniors, which is now like our pre-calculus. I've taught every math really up to AP Calculus, so that's been the last 5 years that I've been doing that. Before that, just a lot of algebra and geometry, all the way down to 7th grade math. So I started with 1 year in Chicago Public, which is where I got my credential. And then my wife and I had an opportunity to work at a school in Honduras for 2 years. And so that's where I taught some junior high math. Not my thing, but it was a good experience. So I taught junior high and high school at that school. And then we came back to California, where my wife's from, and I taught 1 year at Patterson. And then my remaining, the remainder of my 12 years of my 16 years of teaching have all been at Turlock High.
Well, since you have that international experience, can you speak to any differences in the educational system between Honduras and the United States?
Yeah, so that one was my only private school experience, so that one was kind of interesting. Had some students of some more well-to-do families and things like that, and it was an immersion school, so I taught still my same job in English, math, for mostly Spanish-speaking students, but I got them when they were in high school after they'd been doing English for their whole education, really. And so that one, the curriculum, things like that, math, pretty much ran the same way, just an adjustment to culture. And in that place in particular, students who knew each other since kindergarten. And so it taught me to teach through chattiness and teach through and not to squelch the relationships that they have, but find a way to be productive. So that was my big kind of draw from there, was just this group of students who knew each other so well, and trying to find my niche and push the math in there. And but it did feel like kind of during the day, it's the same job I've been doing pretty much everywhere I've taught.
And how about Chicago compared to California? Did you notice any differences there?
Yeah, so that one was a unique experience. It was a brand new school that had opened up to relieve overcrowding from another Chicago school. And so they only had freshmen the year I was there. They didn't want seniors to come in and just kind of not really respect the new building and stuff like that and be able to finish up in the place that they knew as home. So we just had freshmen. So that was a really tight-knit community. But that particular group, it was freshmen mostly in algebra, but went really kind of slow. but again, the overall teaching experience kind of feels similar to me wherever I've taught, but just some differences in just the group was just ninth graders in algebra with like block scheduling, which was different than I've done any other place. But that was another one where it was a really tight knit community because it was this kind of kickoff of this school. And so yeah, those are my experiences outside of California.
Excellent. Do you have any type of story as far as getting into education, or do you have a person that you can pinpoint that was inspirational or anything that led you in that direction, or was it just kind of by happenstance?
Yeah, I think, I mean, in some ways I haven't said, certainly not this is what I always wanted. I never knew what I wanted to do growing up. Um, and don't really have educators in the family. Now I do. My sister is a history teacher, but my experience was having a really great math teacher in high school who I had for several classes in calculus, and really appreciating him. And then I did some high school camp counseling, like summer camps, junior and senior year of my high school year, and just found that kind of mentoring kind of part of that was something I was good at. And so that coupled with math, of course, kudos to elementary teachers, but that's not something I could see myself doing. But loved math content in particular, but it was more of that counseling thing that I got to do, summer camps and things like that, and just just sharing, I guess, life expertise, that sort of thing, coupled with my positive experience with math, kind of sent me off to that. So by the time I had started my freshman year of college, I was fairly confident that's where I was headed, and declared by the end of my first semester.
You said you had a positive experience with math. Do you mean as far as in high school, or can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, high school in particular, but also I had a second grade teacher who just loved math, which was just kind of this interesting kind of I mean, not that nobody does, but he made it a real point of emphasis, you know? And so I kind of had that built in me at a young age from a teacher who just said, math is this really important thing that can carry you, and really worked hard on it. But then in high school, we had this unique class called enrichment math that you could take any year alongside your other math, just as an elective. And it was just kind of a free-flowing, just math he found interesting, math that was happening around you. He'd teach you calculus when you were in calculus, just the little parts that anybody could do. And then would just have a real kind of open, just like discussion about math. It would always end the week with like a group test and then a big like math trivia competition. And so just like this math for math's sake, just kind of allowed you to stretch a little bit. And then he was the same teacher who taught calculus. So then you're getting this rigor and this kind of backup from this guy you already knew. And so that was just a really neat thing, and something I haven't been able to emulate exactly, just because of the courses but that same sort of idea where I've got if I have a chance to push in some math that may not be in the curriculum in particular, particularly with students who I'm talking to after class or something, steer them in a direction of something that here's what it is math.
Students rave about your class. They really appreciate being there, and they always speak very highly of you. So I'm just going to put you on the spot. I'm going to ask you, what is your secret?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, that's partly a long career, and I'm not saying they wouldn't have liked it from the beginning, but you start to get a feel for your classes and what you can kind of do to make that an enjoyable experience, depending on kind of who you've got and what level. And so I have had students basically like my class throughout my career, and I think a lot of that starts with really knowing the content, like kind of number one. So there is this element that you're there for all their needs, but you're not going to be there on day one, like, what can I do for you in life, right? But when those needs arise and it's just like, oh, this is more than math, this kid needs, just somebody, a positive role, like that stuff is built in. But if you kind of start with I'm going to be really good at explaining this subject that most people struggle with, on a level that they get, I found that that's built, just the number of times I've had a student say, man, that year in math was such a great year for me in math. I didn't think I got it before. And a lot of that has to do with just being really conscious of how I explain it to them. I think sometimes, at high school in particular, we might get this idea that it's time to prepare them for the real world or college. And in a sense, there's some part of that, right? But we also do have this unique opportunity to have them every single day. Unlike college, we have them 5 days in a row. They're going to be there. And I'm just like, if you can push content and not be like, hey, in college, you're going to have to study. And there's moments for that, but you're going to have to study on your own. You're going to have to figure it out in the gap days. But, we're here. We don't have those gap days. So I'm going to just lean to the side of the best thing I can do is equip them with as much math as possible. And they're going to learn those life lessons and things like that. And so I just think that's kind of number one. They know that they're getting out of the class what the course is about and more content wise. And then when you know you're getting that, it gives you time to push in the stuff that's a little bit like, things that make the class memorable, right? So my students would tell you, I tell stories. Well, I never start class with, here's a story to engage you. I never say like, but I've put up some prompt on the board. They're just writing it down. They're making the graph happen. There's some think time, some delay time, right? If we talk from bell to bell, that's not a class, right? And so in that time where they're maybe setting up the problem, sneak in a quick something or other that just keeps it human, keeps it like story about my daughter who's hilarious, or like and then it just kind of turns into this oral tradition, right? And so like the next year somebody will be like, Mr. Hakanson, tell us about your middle name. And I'm like, it's not interesting, but somebody heard that last year. And so it's just like, you plan the content, right? You plan to be super prepared for the job you got hired to do. And then it allows you to find those moments and then just bring them back. So I think, I think they know that I'm there to teach them the math and they appreciate that. And then, I guess you just kind of get a feel for how else you can show them that, that you really care. And find those opportunities as they arise. And sometimes it's like slow in different periods. You're just like, second period has a weird feel this year. Like third period's jumped right in and it's like, oh, Mr. Hakanson. The second period's just kind of like, and you just don't push it. And you're just like, I'm starting with the content, and then we'll see when those things arise. And usually you can kind of hit a soft spot eventually with even kind of a tough group. And but there's no hurry to get there really.
You mentioned that students may report that you can explain things in ways that maybe they hadn't heard explained before in their prior math classes. So I know this is going to be a tricky question, so feel free to sidestep it. But there will be future math teachers listening. Is there any way that you could break down how you conceptualize explaining math to students and why you think it clicks for students in your class when it's not clicking in others?
Yeah, that's a really tough one for sure, because that's by feel sometimes, and you learn more as you go. And I think the more you learn math, the better you think math, and you've got these other strategies or a way you explain it to students. But I think a lot of it is just not, on the one hand, not taking for granted that everything that they were supposed to know before they came to you, not by anybody's fault. That's anybody, right? You had all these standards, you had all this content, they might know it. So I think just sometimes being willing to take that step back and not say like, certainly you remember everything you've known, been taught for the last 10 years and retained, right? You just kind of take this spot where you're like, here's my curriculum, and it might take going over this again. And so just kind of stuff where you maybe say the way they learn this makes sense and it's not even inaccurate in a previous class, but maybe as they're moving up, it doesn't extend it, any longer. And so you kind of revisit stuff that they've seen before. And I don't know, what everybody's math background is out there, but stuff like absolute value, where like lots of students know that makes things positive. So you kind of learn that as soon as you know about positive and negative numbers, but you don't really learn what else it means, what's it for. And so just by kind of taking some of the stuff that's not in your course and kind of just saying, here's another way to look at that. I think you can bring people back. But the other thing is just encouraging students to come in just for a couple minutes after school, or in lunch is usually where I'll have them stop by and just say, hey, if it was like just something that we went over that you're like, oh, I should have known that, but I just didn't feel like it. Usually like just a 2-minute conversation just gets it down less on the lecture level and more of the how are they seeing it and how can I relay it back to them.
Excellent, fantastic. Do you feel like, not to name names obviously, but do you feel like some of maybe the people in your department don't share the same attitude? A better way for me, a more direct way for me to ask is, do teachers in your department get frustrated that students don't have all the skills that they're expected to have coming into their classrooms? Because I'll just tell you, in my English department, that's the case with many teachers, where they can't get over the fact that the students don't have the English skills that they should have, and they get hung up on that as opposed to just focusing on what they do have and working with what they do have and just moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I certainly work with a great like understanding group, and I do think it is just this real temptation, copy room, you know, you're with other colleagues to just be like, how did they get here without them? But we all know that's the way it works, right? And so, but there is an element of, yeah, trying to spin that back to the positive, right? Like even for the ones who are kind of like, but in the real world, your employer is going to catch you up to speed if they hired you too, right? They're going to say like, no, I really need to know this part too. But I do think there is an element you'll always kind of fight when maybe you're tired or you had a tough week or even a tough group of students that says, how do they not know this? But we know that's the case, right? Because everybody's had that conversation for all the 16 years I've been teaching. And so I just try to, if it's appropriate, I try to steer those conversations another direction. But I try not to engage in that because first of all, I think it can discount what other teachers are up to. I mean, we wouldn't really want to be held to the same standard. Like the teacher above me and like in college is like, how do they not know this specific calculus skill? It'd be like, I mean, maybe I taught it, maybe I didn't. And so I think, I think it's just, you give yourself a break in on the one hand, because you know you don't have to fill in all the gaps, just like nobody's been able to, but you also you give yourself some flexibility to not start at a level they're not at, and feel comfortable saying, yeah, every year I'm going to have to fill in some gaps, and sometimes that's going to be huge for some of my students.
Excellent. In your classroom, what are some strategies that you really feel like you go to often, that you lean on? Another way to ask is, if I were to walk into your room tomorrow, what types of things do you think I would see?
Yeah, so like the number one thing for me is getting the students talking to each other. And so I'm one of those who I wish I was better at kind of really structuring things and going straight to strategies. So you'd see like the working in of strategies, not maybe not overtly like here's where we do our think, pair, share, even though those are great things and I wouldn't discount any of them, but it's what's happening. And so so you'd see every day like my kids working collaboratively, but me being pretty close in the instruction of the groups or prompting the questions. And so so like right now, especially for the second semester, after they've really been comfortable, they're working kind of in quads because it's just so healthy to see it the way somebody else is seeing it and talk through them. And then I'll show up to the group and really just listen for a while, like what words are coming out, how are they seeing this? And so, and then working with groups individually as much as possible. Now, again, like some days it's like, no, you need this content, especially like in AP classes. Here's all this stuff you don't know that people didn't know till the 1600s. Like, we're not going to discover this today, right? But you find ways to say, to again, lead them up to the point where somebody did. And there's brilliant students out there who like can make the next jump. But what I try to do again is have them, so like every day, if you walked in, there would be a prompt on the board, whether you call it a warm up or whatever, not to keep them busy during attendance, but to actually engage like in thoughtful math with their brains, but speaking like to each other. That's the expectation through that warm up, so that when I mean, I probably have taken attendance, but it's not a keep you busy thing. It's like when it's time to go, you've sat down, you've thought some math, or you've at least reflected like, oh, I don't know that thing that's up there. And so that's where it would start. Um, but then, and again, some of this is curriculum driven, right? And so we have right now a very interactive, like module based math in integrated math 3, where they really are digging through tasks. So that would be like, again, not roll the ball out and say, okay, 55 minutes to figure out the task. It's like do task part 1 and 2, have some conversations, and then I'll listen to conversations and maybe bring up a incorrect but close response. And people, you develop a comfort level with, we're just analyzing everybody's work and seeing how different people are thinking, and then maybe addressing it in a few different ways. So having students share their work. And then when it seems like a full class need, like here's the stuff that needs to be hammered home, then like whole group, like listen, here's some takeaways and things like that. So kind of, I'd say mostly you'd see like the mix and match of like groupings, but still not discounting that we are still there as a group of a teacher and 32. And at some point you want them to leave with a common thread and not 32 different ideas for how this could work, because you're kind of headed somewhere.
Excellent. I can imagine in math, maybe more than any other subject, maybe reluctant learners, or you have students in the back of the room with their arms crossed, or they have their AirPods in, or they got their head down on the desk. When I speak with credential candidates that are in math, they're always looking for tips on how to bring students in. So I know that you mentioned kind of weaving your own anecdotes and bringing your own personality to the classroom as one way to bring students into the instruction. But I don't know, do you have, this is another difficult question, but you did well on the last one, so I'm going to ask you another difficult question. Is there anything that you can say to, like, in math in specific, these are things that you can try to bring kids on board that, you know, frankly aren't very interested in math, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's another tough one. I think one thing, again, by breaking them into smaller groups, you can kind of give them some ownership in a smaller group. So really challenge people, like when you're in a group of 4, like bring what you can to that group, right? Be responsible to that group. And so, again, they know, and they're going to be at varying levels, but like, you know, if an assignment's been assigned and 3 out of the 4 are talking about it and you're not even talking about it, you didn't bring your part, right? You didn't do your job, your responsibility, and whether that's getting it completely correct or just having a question ready. So just kind of being ready to, like, maybe not have them all produce the same thing at the same time, right? And so, like, what answer did you get? But more like, if you're not getting it, can you bring a question? Can you bring and really learn from it? So again, pairing students with others that can kind of help that go, and kind of not let that, again, if you're in a 32 everybody face me sort of direction, then you can lose some students in the back and things like that. If you're walking around and they're in groups of 2 or 3, 3 or 4, you're just, you know, you're kind of letting a group down rather than just being forgotten. But you are going to run into, like, just tough cases, and I would just say, like, I still don't give them a day off. If somebody's tired, like, I'm not the one to, like, rail on them for falling asleep, you know, but, like, let them know that you still know they're there, right? A little knock on the desk and just be like, hey, let's get back to work. But you might not even ask them to produce something at that moment, but just kind of constant, like, I'm here. This is what we're here for. And sometimes I even remind them, like, hey, this is the 55 minutes that you have to do math. Like, you're here, you're not going to be somewhere else. And I'm going to try to make this as best, as good an experience for you as possible. And, you know, what's there to lose from, like, taking a few steps forward this year or in this unit? And I think sometimes that goes a long way too. There's never a student at the end of the year who's like, man, I wish he didn't teach me so much math, you know? But there are some who, they will honestly reflect on a teacher, and be like, oh man, like, we had fun in there, but, like, it took me a while to get up to speed in the next math class because the reason I was having fun is I wasn't getting stuff done, you know? And so even by just staying persistent and just saying, nope, it's going to be math. It's going to be math. Um, you'll catch some kids who are like, oh man, he didn't let me off the hook easy. And then have a good experience in math because yeah, they put it together for 5 straight days, week after week, and make some progress.
So is it fair to assume that your desks in your classroom are grouped in 4s or 5s or something to that effect?
Again, it kind of depends. So
Okay.
my kind of initial seating when the year starts and through most of the first semester is groups of 4, but 4 kind of facing me, almost like audience seating,
Okay.
like so some in the wings and some facing me. And so that's kind of their group. And there'll be some group days during the week. But again, a lot of that is not as much controlling everything, but just saying like front and center, there's going to be stuff that you're going to need to know at some point pretty soon. So talk to the person to your left and your right, make sure your group agrees, and then we go for that. Second semester, and again, this happens a lot in AP Calculus, but even right now, they're like, why is this changing every day? And it's just like, well, because there's different goals now. So like now they know a lot of the stuff. And so they should just be talking through things rather than just waiting for kind of the prompt from the front. And so now you'll see most of the second semester, they come in with 2 desks facing 2 desks. And the goal is to talk your way through these problems. And so in the integrated math too, and that's again, another part, just being prepared, knowing what's coming, right? And so not being stuck to, 4 desks facing each other. It might depend on the tasks. So we've been through tasks. We've been through this curriculum 3 or 4 times. I know the ones that are going to work well, that they're going to be able to draw the meaning themselves out of, and they'll face each other during that one because the stuff's going to happen. But I know a task, and that might even be a great design task, but it just like, they're going to have a hard time making like the big day's takeaway in that class period. So now they're facing me, and it's like, see what you get out of number 1, but not just, again, I think so often we think that it was supposed to work one way, maybe even one way that we saw in a video, and some days are just to be like, no, this is where you need to, again, never need to lecture like straight for a period, but just be like, I need to keep drawing their attention to like where they should be headed, but still try to get that from where they were thinking.
Excellent. Excellent. So thinking about your entire career, is there a challenge that stood out to you in your profession? And that could be a student, or that could be a class, that could be a subject, that could be just something professionally. Like I'll throw out an example, like trying to get tenure, because the students in the program right now, they're stressed. Obviously, they have a lot going on. They're either involved in an internship, or they're finishing up their student teaching, and they're going to be going into the field to get hired, hopefully, into the job market, and then they'll be starting their first year of teaching. So it's helpful for them to hear stories of veteran teachers that have struggled and overcome those struggles. Do you have a story that you could share with us?
Yeah, I mean, the most challenging, there's challenges in every year, in every class, but the most challenging time is when you have a student who really kind of takes over your whole kind of teaching planning, right? Because they're difficult, they're not hearing it, there's not, it might be hard to talk to a parent about, you're not getting a lot of support there. And so just getting through the day to day when one student, right, out of maybe 150 is really absorbing all your energy is just something that's hard to plan for. And so like right now, because I have like honors and AP juniors and seniors who have their own sort of things you deal with, they're stressed, they have, you know, sometimes intense parents, things like that. But I really think the real drain is when it's a student that's going to be there the next day and they're going to be causing the same exact problems and just powering through that. And again, there's no like simple solution because that obviously depends so much on the student themselves. But there were definitely years, especially early on, at Turlock when, you know, I was teaching the algebra readiness classes and the intervention classes where they're really desperate to get kids help they need in math. But it really means sometimes another period of math. So now they have 2 periods of something they don't want, and you're trying to be that help. And those are the classes that can kind of turn into you're not accomplishing what you set out to accomplish. And that can be just an emotional drain. Like, you're preparing lessons and then it turns into just preparing, like, how can I seat the kids today so that and so I think, I mean, that takes, I think, a refocus in, because then you do have the administrator expectations, right? You're like, what if they come in this day and it's the zoo that it is every day? Like, I don't like to be like, hey, administrator in today. I mean, they'll drop in sometimes anyways. Like, let's, you bribe them to be like, okay, now is your good day. And then we're back. You still are always trying to work on, like, how can I break through and make this manageable? And so I think the longer you stick with kids and show them you're basically on their side, at least you can get somewhere, right? But you might have a whole year that's basically not a throwaway. And I guess my advice there would be, like, keep thinking how many kids in that class actually aren't doing that. I think even in our most out of control classes, we find that 2/3 are really not there, like, not causing those problems. And so you still might have to gut through 50 minutes, but you have to remind yourself there's all these other students there. And I think, like, that tough student, you remind them that, like, you want them there, like, your goal is to have them there. And so just, like, I don't know if it's time for a quick strategy there, but my goal always with, like, a kid like that is, if it really is disrupting the whole thing, they might need a break. And I would introduce that at the beginning of the year. Like, I'm not trying to start a referral train. I'm not like, it might have to come to that. But if it's disruptive, I'm going to just ask you to take a break and just step outside the door. But I'm not going to leave them for more than, like, 30 seconds. Like, the next time I think about them, I need to go out there because, like, I'm not trying to keep them out of the class they're on the roster for. I'm just trying to kind of remind them that, like, I've got to be able to do my job. And for a moment there, it's not going to happen. And then hopefully I can say, all right, I need a minute, guys, do this thing, and then go have that immediate conversation. So I'd always drift there early and often so that it doesn't feel like, and of course, as soon as you write a referral, it's like, now you've set a precedent for the thing that makes a referral happen, right? So the next time somebody else does something. And so, but yeah, those battles, like deciding what was best, like, should I have sent them up so that we start a whole documentation train, or should I have tried to kind of appeal more to their need? Or those are the things that you kind of feel out as you go along, but they can certainly be a challenge.
You briefly mentioned a throwaway year, and then you kind of sped up and away from that idea. But I really like that you said that. If there was a student in the credential program who, let's say they start their first year at a site and they get halfway through and they feel like they're in a throwaway year, what words of wisdom could you give to someone who feels like, you said you feel as though you're not accomplishing what you set out to do? So when you find yourself in a state of, like, the doldrums where you're not accomplishing what you set out to do and you feel like you're in this throwaway year mode, like, what do you tell yourself, or how do you frame it? I know you mentioned focusing on the kids who aren't causing problems in class and kind of showing up for them, but is there anything else that you could, maybe words of encouragement? Because there are going to be many students who are going to find themselves in difficult assignments when they start up in the fall.
Right. Especially early in the career, sometimes that's what you find is the difficult assignments. But there's no throwaway year, right? There's kids with needs, and needs that you meet matter, right? And so like, my wife and I did foster care for a few years. And one of the things they'd always say is, even if it was 2 months, even if it was 3 months, like, those connections and those things that happen matter, and they make the next step easier, right? So you might have the kid who, and like kids, there's going to be ones that are going to be problems in school for most of their career. There's going to be some that mature incredibly from ninth grade to 10th grade. And some of that could have been because you kind of stuck to your guns and you still got, in a bad spot, like it felt like you weren't getting much done, but you were still there. And so, yeah, again, there are students certainly, even in those classes, that are benefiting from you being there, and even the one who's really giving you the hardest time maybe as well. And I would just say, the school year is going to go on, that class is going to go on. If that transition happens from a teacher who's just ready to give it up to somebody else, the rest of the year is not going better for that group either, right? That sends it into chaos, that sends it into, and so I think you can show a lot about your kind of mettle as a teacher, that like you still made the thing happen, you still were prepared every day. I think that would be the worst, is just to kind of give up on the preparation, right? To not, because you're still saying, no, this is, every administrator, every teacher understands, and sometimes we don't even think that that's possible. They understand the classes you get into that are going to be just really, really difficult. But by showing up, being professional, being prepared, and then just keep sticking with it. And so, and I would reach out for help early, right? Just be like, assistant principal or dean or whoever, what would you do? Like, what would you have me do? Maybe it is the thing where they're just like, well, because sometimes you do get that support, and they're like, no, you really have my permission to send this kid up with a referral every time until things change, because that's what you're going to need to get that done. And so I would just say, like, don't stop looking for resources and support to get you through that thing. But as far as a teacher who maybe you're like, I'm not going to be here next year, you still put together that body of work that says, but I saw it through to the end. Because maybe you don't need that next year. Maybe you do need a new setting. But I think making it to the end speaks so much about what you're able to do. Because if you're going to build a career out of it, you're going to have to stick to something,
Absolutely. You mentioned the word professional. Can you talk a little bit about when you hear the word professionalism and what it means to be a professional in our occupation, kind of what that looks like as far as dealing with students, parents, and administration?
Yeah, sure. I think that's, again, another thing that's so key, is just, yeah, the idea that we're a trained group of people doing a job that's kind of different depending on your assignment and your day, but there's still this level of, you need to come as a prepared educator. And then you're going to have all these other duties that just happen depending on the group you got that year, the needs of that group, where you find yourself in little different leadership roles at the school. And so I just think, like, showing up ready to, we talk about ready to be, I guess, positive and professional, right? And so being prepared and knowing that you're the best person for that job. And so, so again, like, parents, if I get an email, that email that I write back is going to, first of all, happen that day if I see the email, no longer than 24 hours if I don't happen to see it before I leave. It's going to be civil. It's going to be short and to the point, and let them ask more questions. It's going to address everything they asked, unless it seems like something could be lost in communication. And then, say, I'll get on the phone with you because I don't think this could be communicated there. But just not rushing thing out there, and certainly not being defensive. That's going to be hard with parents, and just kind of being really clear. I think that's one of the things that helps me with my class is past students who, students are going to have siblings and friends, have had a good experience. And so when we do run into a tough thing, or somebody think, I kind of have this, Mr. Hakanson knows what he's doing sort of thing, because you've been there long enough. And that part of that is just being professional in all my interactions, and not, keeping a level head. With administrators, same thing. Like, especially young teachers, people just going into it. It's not really, your time or place to disagree with things happening above you. Even 16 years in, it's not mine. Like I feel like I have a voice because I've been a part of the community long enough, but there's no benefit to just saying they change this every year. And so now it's just like, but you can do it, right? Like you can do it. And people, I mean, even when I talk to my students, because they'd be like, why would you do this? Or they'll be like, I'm like, if your job depended on it, you're kind of standing in the community, depended on school safety or whatever it might be, then maybe you would think like not wearing hats is important, or all these things that you kind of, if it's above where you're making the decisions, then you got to trust that there was some information that went into that, and just say, I think we forget that we needed the job when we got it, right? We're desperate to get that job. We agreed to it. And of course things are going to change. But we're not the administrators. That's not the job we made. And so I think that relationship, I think you can make it clear through appropriate channels and when good relationships have been formed, what you need and want and things like that. But yeah, I just think it's so important to just be professional, courteous, and not just to fall in line, but to be like, my default is to do what I'm asked, you know? And then go from there. And then you're just always in a good spot. And so it's been tough to leave schools. I've left schools to go to, I mean, it's been a while now because I'm happy where I am, but it's tough to leave schools. But when you do, everybody knows that people are going to make choices for their family and their things like that. And nobody's staying. And so I remember having a tough conversation because I only stayed for a year, at a school. And they were like, no, I mean, you have to do, but a lot of that probably had to do with, and getting a good, word from the next one and say, oh, we're going to miss them, but you're getting a good one, had to do with just being ready to do what was asked and being professional every day. And that's huge.
That was really well said. Thank you for that. I noticed that you're pretty involved in Spirit Week dress ups, things of that nature. Can you speak to maybe how that helps you build relationships with students or in the classroom, or why you think that those things are important, or is that just your personality? I enjoy those things too. So obviously no judgment or anything like that, but I don't know. Can you speak to the importance of Spirit Day and being involved in things like that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, it's actually kind of not my personality, which makes it so easy. Because generally that's just, hey, participate in this group thing without too much commitment. I don't like to be out in front of people. You probably rarely see me out at the rallies or anything like that. I'm not gonna whoop it up. I'm not, but it's so easy to throw on something for a dress up day. And just break the ice for one, just crack them up for one day. And so we tend to have a lot of dress up days. I don't do them all, but the ones I can do and well, I'll do. And it's just like Geek Day. Every year I'll throw on like whatever my kids have, not that they're geeks, but they're kids, right? So I get like a Pikachu hat and suspenders and like a calculator tucked in. And for a whole day I'm teaching like that. And I think, again, I'm just, like kids have a good time in my class, but I'm not like, I don't know. I'm not a bubbly personality or whatever, but I just think those things, you just be surprised how often that builds to that. So again, currently we're at home and they're trying to keep us connected. And so I've been sending photos of what we've been up to and it gives it a level of, yeah, just like humanist connectedness, without much investment, right? And without stealing 30 minutes of instruction. You just dressed differently that day. You participated in the thing that day, but you didn't say like, let's take 30 minutes for me to talk about my life. You're wearing a Pikachu hat. Like, are you in Pokemon? And they're like, oh man, I used to love Pokemon. It just it just allows those moments to be a little bit more natural because you just went with the flow of the school that week.
Well, I wanted to ask you if there were any misconceptions or common misconceptions about teaching that you'd like to comment on or dispel. Because one thing that I always manage to tell my classes is that in education, uh, students become adults, and then adults have opinions on education. And it's one of the only jobs that people do where every single person in our society has been around teachers for the majority of their developmental years. So, like, for example, you don't spend K-12 with police officers, and you don't spend K-12 with firefighters or veterinarians. It's like everyone got an education, everyone grew up around teachers. And it seems that, for better or for worse, people tend to have, I don't know if it's fair to say that people have polarized opinions about education, but I'm just curious if there's anything when you open the newspaper or when you watch the nightly news or when you hear gossip or chatter, is there anything that you think the community or society feels about teaching that's maybe misrepresented? Or do you feel that as these students begin their path down the road of a teacher, is there anything that they may be believing erroneously that you think that you could maybe shed some light on?
Hmm, that's a interesting question. Um, yeah, I mean, maybe on a national media level, right? Like public educator is supposed to fit a certain thing. And I think the thing that sometimes they think is we're getting, some information, some agenda that we're asked to like give to everybody, And I just find that teachers are so diverse in their thought and I think the common thread is like, we care about our students. I mean, at Turlock High, it's this group that cares about students, but you'd have people from all spectrums of thought and belief, religion, politics, and like the idea that like our faculty meetings are get together and like whatever the national agenda is at the time, like, you know, spread that to our students. And just like day to day, I prepare calculus, right? And they might get some whiffs of what I think on bigger issues by just the way I talk or like how I treat students and let them come to some of their own conclusions there. But I do think, yeah, that idea that 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 we don't have any autonomy, like, we you're not going to be crazy, but you're in control of your classroom and kind of the way it runs. There is some control, and you can decide what the little community looks like that you're responsible for, right? In your four walls, and of course you're going to pay attention to school rules and you're going to be respectful of the group of students you have. But you can be yourself. I think actually early, I wasn't always myself because sometimes you do hear that like, here's the rules for the first semester of school. You got to be super hard or whatever you got to be, right? But there's different, I think that's maybe the other misperception of teachers is like, there's a right way to make sure that teaching happens like during the school year. So you'll read some books and they're well-meaning, but like I was miserable when I felt like I had to be like this really strict teacher for the first semester so they wouldn't walk all over me. It wasn't working for me. But I think there's a spot for that too. And when I say strict teacher, I don't even mean like that as a derogatory thing. I just think like I think kids need all sorts of teachers, right? So I love when they go through their 7 periods and I know they've got somebody who's a little bit loose and somebody who just like runs a tight ship. And some of those kids will speak up, and even in my class, and they'll be like, can you just like maybe organize this a little bit more like it was last year? Or like, can you check my homework every day? Because like I needed that. And so you find like there's so many students. And of course, those things I can adjust to that student and things like that. But I think like trying to be this perfect idea of a teacher and not allowing yourself to grow into it can be kind of stunting. And but like there's those people out there who are like, no, this is the tight ship I need to run. This is what happens at this time, and you run with that too. But I think there's more flexibility to it. And sometimes it's different period to period. I had freshmen last year. I just had one group of freshmen. I had one less group of calculus students last year, so they just threw me a group of freshmen. And that group I was super strict with for a couple of reasons. One, because I'm going to have them as juniors and seniors, and I don't need them to know that I'm fun yet because then they come in already like, And so like, it wasn't like a list of rules, but it really was like kind of trying to break some kind of immature junior high behavior as they're coming into high school. So like, they'd walk to the trash can. I don't have a written rule on that. I don't want too many written rules, but I just be like, why are you walking to the trash can while we're doing math? And they're like, I had a piece of paper. I'm like, but you keep it at your desk, just like stuff like that. And so I think like that, maybe that's the other thing, is that, yeah, that there's not this perfect way to even do your 5 classes. If you're a secondary teacher, each group is going to require different things from you.
So it sounds like you're saying one of the benefits of teaching is there's no quote unquote correct way to do it, and that it's a profession that you can kind of bring your own strengths to the table, and you can accentuate those strengths in the classroom, and you can maybe be, because I have the same experience where like I feel like some students really, really gravitate towards my teaching style, and I have students that really push away from it because just there's students that are more organized and they appreciate more organization, and I can tend to be a little more sporadic in my teaching and things to that nature. So it sounds like you appreciate the fact that you can kind of do it in your own way, and there's no one right way to do that. But with that said, if you weren't teaching, and I know you've been teaching for a while, if you weren't teaching, what do you think that you would be doing?
Oh man, stay-at-home dad. I don't know. Like, I'm not a sales. I couldn't sell a thing. I'm not a salesperson. Man, I really don't like. This is the job for me. Which, I just like. I'm not going to get my administrator's credential. I'm not. This is what I'm doing. But yeah, I mean, like, I'd have to have funds to travel the world. I'd like to think I'd be traveling the world, but but I don't know what profession would. I mean, this one allows me to do that some,
Yeah.
On the time front, but yeah, I really don't know.
Well, if this is the job for you, and it sounds like it is, what is your favorite thing about being a teacher?
I just think like the day to day, you've got, even if the students don't know that they need it, you're giving them this thing they need to kind of jump off into and use, for the rest of their life. And kind of like, even as you said, like, everybody's had a teacher, right? And it's such a fabric of our society, and we get to be that thing. And so kind of fill this need. And so I like the combination of just daily interaction, like different every day. And I think the seasonal aspect of it, not just the breaks, but just that there's renewal, right? There's like, now this thing is happening again and you're better at it, and it's different group, and like, here, why don't you try this class this year? So there's still some flexibility to it and some creativity and just kind of a reset at those break times. And so of course the break is nice itself, but I just mean the overall, I think it's like this healthy flow of work, where like, it's changeable, but you're still working on the same thing. You're working on how you can do this teaching thing best. And then next year you get another try. So if you have the same group, you've got all these improvements. And if you have a new group, you're challenging yourself. And so I think there's opportunities like for these mid-career boosts still in the same place. So when I got AP Calculus after like 11 years in it, it was scary, right? The summer preparing, I'm just like, okay, here's these kids who are going to think on a level above me. If I'm not on in that first year in AP Calc, it was fun, but it was like stressful, because it's like I get put on the spot and I'm like, I'm going to have to get back to you because I just didn't have the reps. But then you get to do it again, and now it's like this super comfortable class. And so I think just like, yeah, that idea that you're this kind of like, I don't know, like pillar of the community, but kind of in this more like humble back, I control M4, like that's where I hang out. That's where you can find me. But then people go out from there, and I'm writing these letters of rec to like all these incredible places and programs, and sending off mechanical engineer, like all this stuff is just neat. Yeah.
Awesome. That's a fantastic answer. Thank you for that. Is there anything that you would like to add to the discussion, considering that the majority of the people that are going to watch this are about 2 months out from receiving their credential, and then they're going to be starting up, hopefully, if we're back in session in the fall. Is there just anything that we didn't cover that you just really feel like students of that demographic need to hear?
Yeah, I would say like number one, people will always say like students aren't how they used to be, but like you're at the beginning, so they're exactly how they are right now. Like you can't be in that conversation. You know, you are signing up for this group of students, and they're awesome. And like there's going to be challenges, but like I just think there's very little productivity in saying like if I was teaching in the 50, like that's not where you are, right? And so um so yeah, like jump into it. Be be ready for the job you took. If it's the job you wanted, great. If it's the one that you just needed to latch on to something, then be super professional and find the way you can meet those kids' needs. And yeah, and I guess just stick with it. I think so. Like I'm an experienced teacher, and my students like, but I still end up pretty self-conscious about my teaching, right? And so like we'll go observe each other, and it's just so evident that teachers see great things in other teachers. So when they observe, when we go observe, I observe a more, you know, managed classroom. They observe my more relaxed classroom. We both get something out of it. We both learn from it. We add that element. And so I just think connect to people early, find somebody to latch onto, whether it's like a hand-given mentor or whether it's just like another just solid person in the department. And just remind yourself that like it's going to be hard to be an expert from day one, and even in year 16 it's hard to feel like an expert. I think because I mean a lot of our conversation has been about how fluid this job is and how like different things call for different so just like flexibility and balance. I guess I think um, balance of high expectations, but you're personable, right? You have a syllabus, but you can listen to the kid who says, listen, I was actually really sick and I couldn't get this thing in. Well, your syllabus says I don't accept late work. Like, do you have some flexibility to, not if they announce it in front of the class. Sometimes I'll say that to my students. I'm like, well, your only mistake was like saying that in front of all 30, because now I owe that to all 30, right? And so trying to build that in early, like, listen, this is the way this class is going to work. Always contact me if there's like some, you know, so it's just a balance in all those things, not thinking that you failed if you didn't do it exactly the way you thought it was going to go, because then again you feel like you're stuck in this year of, I put it in between. So yeah, just like not too many rules, the obvious ones, but not the ones that you have to like, you know. The one other thing I guess I would say is I remember a guy coming into my classroom early, and he's like, the biggest thing I got out of yours was you just kept teaching. Like you didn't stop and do like, I think he was seeing this in himself, a 3-minute lecture of what the students were doing wrong. They already knew what they were doing wrong. You would say their name and keep teaching, and they might not even stop in that moment, but you kept teaching, and if you had to revisit, you did. And so yeah, just keep teaching.
Fantastic. And then lastly, either education related or not, just for fun, have you read any books? Have you seen any movies or listened to any albums that you want to recommend that
Oh
people
man.
should tap into?
um I haven't read a book in a while.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of the last one. Oh, I read a Malcolm Gladwell one on the plane, his most recent one, which is kind of fun because it's like stories and math and stats and stuff. But I didn't like it as much as his other ones. But music wise, I listen to a lot of music. I really like. I mean, it sounds cliche, but like independent rock. So like, who does that mean? But I really like Bon Iver's last album. Um, the National, just like stuff like that. And then sometimes, because that kind of, you know, leaves me in this kind of like sad dad rock place. I need some more upbeat stuff.
Sure.
Um, so I really like Andrew Bird. I don't know if you've heard his last album.
I have not heard his last album, but I have listened to Andrew
Oh
Bird.
yeah, it's really fun. And movies, I don't watch movies at all. I can't do it. I don't know why, but I really like shows where like cooks just go around the world. So like Ugly Delicious on Netflix,
Okay.
or Somebody Feed Phil. That's actually my favorite one because he's so like genuine and nice, and then he just tries people's food.
Excellent. Well, on behalf of my students, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day and sharing all this information with them. I really feel like they're going to be able to watch this and reflect on it and just get some really, really fantastic veteran perspective. And I just want this to go on record. I just so much appreciate all the positivity and trying to see the bright sides of teaching and trying to turn some potentially negative situations into things that are positive. It's just really, really fantastic to hear. So I thank you so much for your time and for a great interview.
Yeah, no problem.
Fantastic.